This time on the Prop Master, will we really rocket ahead on this job? Rocket? I'm sorry. I mean, I apologize. The worst thing is that somebody had to write that. It was me. I wrote it. I'm sorry. Bad jokes aside, we do get a lot done, and it's really starting to look good. And I'd like to thank all of you out there for all the comments you've been leaving. It's extremely helpful for my channel. And with the algorithm going the way it has been, I really need everybody to interact with this video as much as possible. Whether or not you like, subscribe, leave a comment, even if it's just to say hi, forward this to anybody else that you know of that might like it. Any interaction is going to help a huge amount. But with that out of the way, we actually have quite a bit to do on that, so we better get started. Okay, so what we have here is we have a reducer just like we used up here, but this one was a 3" to 2" reducer, and this is a 3" to 1.5" reducer. So basically, whatever you used here, use one step smaller. You can see here, it should be just a little bit smaller than these pieces here. And I have that reducer attached to the same 3" coupler that I used to sand this piece here. Just took the sandpaper off, put a 3" piece of PVC pipe into here, and then push this down onto it. And I'm doing that so that I can make a cut on here. And if you'll recall from when we were doing this, this is straight, whereas this actually flares out at the bottom, so it's not actually at 90 degrees to this top part, but this is. So I've attached it to this 3" coupler so that I can make a good 90-degree cut across here. And you'll make it the same way you did with this piece here, whether or not it be a bandsaw or miter box and a handsaw kind of thing. Whatever you did to do that, you'll do the same thing here. Because it's going to be a little bit difficult because you're going to have to cut in the middle of this 45-degree angle. I made a mark here that is 3/4 inch from this angle change right here. And if you're using a bandsaw or a compound miter saw or something like that, the distance between here and here, I want to say is 1.25 inches. Yeah, that's 1.25 inches from here to here. But I'm going to go ahead and make that cut, and I'll be right back. Here's the piece after I've cut it. And once again, it's just measure from the corner right here to 3/4 inch out, which is about 19 millimeters. Make a mark there, and you can use that to make your cut. Also, for the distance between here and here is 1.25 inches. Now that I have this cut, I have to attach this to here. And to do that, I want to make it perfectly centered. So I want to actually put a piece of Sintra inside here. And unfortunately, my 2" the piece I cut out with a 2" hole saw is so close, but it's just a little bit smaller than it really needs to be. So this is a 1.5 inch PVC pipe and a 1 3/4 inch hole saw, which is about 44 millimeters. But I hesitate to give you millimeters for this stuff because I don't know what size the PVC pipe is going to be in metric. So, if you're in the United States, it's going to be 1 3/4 inch hole saw, and it fits actually snugly in here. It fits tight in there. So that'll work fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put I'm going to drive this into the bottom and make sure that it's flush all the way around. And I can see that that is flush all the way in. So I'm going to make a mark and I'm going to cut this piece of PVC pipe at that mark, and I'll be right back. Here's our piece after I've cut it, and I'm just going to glue it to the inside of this piece here using my PVC pipe glue. Do the inside first, do the outside, and do the inside one last time. And then slide that in there. I want it to get as flat as I can. Now it wants to push apart, so you have to hold it for a few seconds. Okay, now it's staying in place. And it's flat all the way around, so I'll give this a couple of minutes to cure and I'll be back. Here's my piece all glued together. I'm just gonna take that, and I've gone to hot glue because I still don't have any of the thick super glue, but I'm gonna use this construction grade hot glue, and I'm just going to run a bead all around. Doesn't have to be really pretty, but it does need to cover everything. And then I'm going to set that down onto this piece of paper, and then I'm going to drop this into it and press it flat. Now, there's no getting around the fact that this is going to definitely glue the this piece to the paper, but that's okay. By doing it this way, it guarantees that this will be flush with the end of this. In fact, I might take some hot glue and pour it over the top, or run it in a bead over the top of that joint, just all around the seam, just to make sure that stays secure. And then once that cools off, we can go ahead and work on putting something on the top. Okay, so everything has cooled off, and we can see if we can remove this from the paper now. Yeah, I really didn't expect that we'd be able to get that completely off without having some paper tear there. But I'm going to take this over to some sandpaper and clean that off real quick. Okay, there we go. It's looking pretty good. Now we can deal with this top part here. And to do that, I've cut this piece out. It's I used a 3 1/4 inch hole saw for that. This is the 1/8 of an inch thick Sintra, and I'm just trying to, I don't want this to be too thick. If you don't have the 1/8 of an inch thick Sintra, just stick with the 1/4, that'll be fine. But if you do have it, then I would use that in this particular case. Now with a 3 1/4 inch hole saw, it's not going to be quite as big as this piece, depending on how your cut turned out. This cut right here turned out, it might be closer to the same size, or it might be even a little bit more gap around here. That's fine, it doesn't have to be that perfect. In case you're not familiar, this is a hole saw. It's basically just a drill bit that cuts large holes. Hole saws are going to be extremely important in this build, or at least this part of the build, because what they do is they give you a perfectly round cut with a perfectly centered hole in the middle. And as long as your pilot hole is the same size as the aluminum rod that's running through the middle of your jetpack, then that's exactly what you need. So like I said before, I'm not that familiar with the PVC pipe sizes in metric countries, but the basic rule of thumb that I use is if you measure the size that you're trying to match. Usually it'll be the internal diameter of one of the PVC pipes. In this case, it's the external diameter of this piece. Take that measurement and then add, 3 millimeters to that to get the size hole saw that you want to fill that area. Now I want this to be perfectly centered, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run my piece down my rod there. That way when I glue this piece onto it, I know that they're going to both be perfectly centered. And to glue this piece on, I'm going to use my regular super glue. You could use the thin super glue on this as well, but it tends to run all over the place. This is still, pretty thin, but not as bad as thin super glue. And obviously the gel or thick super glue would be the best choice. And I just wanted to put that, I know this is a little bit small, so I made sure that I put that around the inside of that. And now I can just push that down. I want to push it down gently because I don't want it to bend down in the middle. Okay, and now I can take this off. And here is this bottom piece. Now this gap is going to come in handy when we put the next piece on top of that. Hopefully it'll kind of hold it in the right spot. Now before we glue this back onto here, let's sort of check this out. And sure enough, here we have some raised lettering that just says what it is, which is a 1.5 by 3-inch reducer. I don't know if you can, I don't think I can get it to show that, I'm afraid. But I'm just going to take the sanding stick and smooth that out. It's just easier to do it now than when it's up on here. Okay, that's gone. Is there anything else? Okay, I think that's it. Nothing down here. Okay, now we can go ahead and glue this onto here. And then we're just going to put a reasonably large amount of, don't get too carried away, but we want plenty of super glue here. Don't get it out to the very edge because once again, that's actually going to show up. And just push this into place. And the magic of this little rod in the middle is that it keeps everything perfectly centered. Now we can just continue building up. Okay, for this next part, you're going to need one of these long, skinny funnels. There are a lot of them that will work okay. This is the one that I've found that works the best, and you can find this on Amazon. It's called a Lumax, L-U-M-A-X, long neck funnel. The number is LX1614. So you can probably see all that on there. And I found a similar one at O'Reilly's. You can find them, at pretty much any auto parts store, but this is the one that I think has the best angles here to work for the jetpack. And unfortunately, there's no good way to cut this. The way it's made, if you lay this flat on the surface here, it's going to lean further one direction than the other. Also, if you look at the cross section of the way it's actually made, you'll see that it is much thinner on one side than on the other. So that makes putting a hole saw piece in here and having it perfectly centered, that's not going to work either. So pretty much anything that we do is going to be a little bit off. So we're going to have to get this as close as we can, and then we're going to have to make some adjustments afterwards just by holding it in position and then filling it with either some spray foam, caulking around the edges, something like that, just to adjust the shape. But you'll see that when we get to it. The first thing I want to mark is this is just the piece of Sintra that I used to cut out the last little bit here that we used up here at the top of this. You know, whatever piece you cut that out of, we're going to use that as our marking guide. I'm just going to hold this down to where it stops, and you know, unfortunately that's not super accurate because I can move this all over to get different lines. And even though this is not perfectly symmetrical, I think the best thing to do is to go and kind of measure it with a square, just to kind of see how level we're, like, you know, how close to level we are. 4.5 there. Pretty close to 4.5 there. That's close enough for what we're doing here. And I have a silver Sharpie, and I'm going to mark this all the way around. And I'm going to cut that out. I mean, you can see this definitely not symmetric. I mean, it dips down on this side. Another thing you can do is, let's take a measurement. So that is 4 3/8. Come on this side. And it's also it's a little bit more than 4 3/8, so. Better to be a little bit larger. This is the side we'll be using up here. So this will be what we lose. So adding a little bit more material is better than taking some away. Okay, so I'm going to cut that out on the bandsaw. You can use whatever kind of saw you want to use. You could probably even get away with some shears if you wanted to, you know, cut down from the bottom up and then use shears to cut around it. Whatever works best for you. Okay, so here's my piece that I just cut out. Now what we want to do is we want to measure up 3 7/8 of an inch, or 9.7 centimeters, and make a mark there. And it's not up like this. You actually want to go ahead and follow the angle. You'll have some trouble because this is going to hit this part here. In fact, what we might want to do is let's just cut this part off real quick. I'm going to just zip that off real quick and I'll be right back. Okay, there was nothing precise about that cut. I just kind of lopped it off in roughly the right position. But now it'll make it a lot easier to get our measurements here. Okay. And just go all the way around and do that. I'm going to take this off camera real quick so I can actually see what I'm doing and make those marks. Okay, so you can see I just kind of put those marks all around, and now I can just sort of connect the dots. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. And try to cut that out as closely as you can. And there's no way this is going to be right, you know, completely perfect everywhere. So, like I said, we'll have to do a lot of adjusting afterwards. So I'm going to cut this out and I'll be right back. So here's our piece. Now that we've cut that, and what I'm going to do now is take my silver Sharpie and I'm just going to color the top of this. Actually, at this point, it's not as bad as it was on the smaller end, but you can still see that it's thinner here, than it is, say, here. I'm going to take my Dremel tool and I'm just going to try to thin out some of this stuff on top so that it's closer to this thickness. So I'm skipping this area here. Also, I'm going in the direction of rotation. This is spinning that way. No, it's not. It is. Doesn't matter too much, but if I go against the rotation, it's more likely to dig into the plastic. Just going to remove any plastic that's kind of sticking up. And I'm going to mark it again. And I'm going to see if I can't remove a little bit more over here. You're never going to get it perfect, but I want to get it as closely as I can do it just by looking at it. Okay, that's about as close as I can get it without getting too nitpicky about it. I just don't want there to be a huge amount of plastic here and a tiny little bit here. That'll throw everything off by like 1/8 of an inch. And I'd rather it be a little bit closer than that. Okay, so what I have here is another piece of 1/4 inch Sintra, which I've cut out with the hole saw. In this case, 1 3/4 of an inch, which is 4.4 centimeters. This is a little small. Ideally, what I really want is a 1 7/8 inch hole saw, but they don't seem to make that size. So, unfortunately, if you can see, it's quite a bit too small, but the other closest size is 2 inches, and 2 inches is too large. So, I don't want to make this any shorter to accommodate 2 inches. So, we're going to make this work. So, basically like we did before, I'm going to put hot glue on the inside of this, but instead of turning this upside down and dropping this into it, which pushes all the hot glue out toward the end here, I'm going to put the hot glue in here, and then I'm going to set it on top of that, looking down on it to make sure I can get it as centered as I possibly can. And I've got my hot glue gun with my industrial hot glue stick in here, and I want to put quite a bit in here. Get a light. It's hard to see, but that looks okay, I think. And now let me let that cool off. Now that the glue is cooled off, let me show you a better way of doing that. This is how I should have done it. What I've got here is a piece of Sintra that was cut out with a 2-inch hole saw, which is the size of the outside diameter here. And this is a piece of paper that I actually just laid on top of the Sintra when I cut this out, so it's the right size there. That piece of paper is important. Then I would take the piece of 1 3/4 inch Sintra, and I would lay it on top of that, run it down this same pipe laying on top of this paper. Then I would put the hot glue on here, and then when I slid this down over that, now I can feel with this 2-inch piece that it fits perfectly on here, and I can make sure that it's in the right spot that way, real easy. And that's a much better way of making sure you get the proper placement on here. As it turns out, I'm actually pretty close. So that turned out pretty well. And the advantage of having the paper is now the hot glue won't stick to this and you can peel it off. The paper will be stuck, but you're gonna have that either way. So you can clean the paper off afterwards. So now that we have this all glued up, let's go ahead and put it in place. And unfortunately, there's no real trick to this. You're just going to have to look at it. That's why I have this white piece up here. I can kind of see by spinning this around. It's actually better than on the prototype. It was moving around way more, but I can see that this seems to be like the lowest area. So I'm going to put a mark there just to let me know. So in the end, this part will be down as far as it can go, and the other side's going to be sticking up a little bit. But that's okay. Once we get everything glued in place, we'll come back in with some caulking and fill any gaps that are there. You could fill it in with super glue and baking soda, but it's going to be really hard since this is a curved area. It's going to be really hard to get that in there and make it stay. So I think smoothing out with caulk will be much easier. But before we do that, we'll want to sand everything as smooth as we can. Oh, this is pretty good. But if this was a little bit too big, it would stick down further, and you'd want to, go back and kind of trim that out. In this case, it's a little bit small. It's not going down all the way. So what I need to do is to take the Dremel tool and go in here and thin this out a little bit. I'm going to go to once again, I'm going to try to remove more material from areas that it's thicker. Okay. Now, whatever you do, make sure that you're not doing this in such a way that it actually makes this, you don't want to remove this bottom edge here. You just want to remove the inside part. Ideally, what you'd like is for this to slide over this piece of Sintra and touch the PVC, because this piece of Sintra is a little bit smaller than the PVC, so there's a little bit of a lip there. And ideally, you'd like that to sit on that lip. Okay, and we're almost there here. Well, in this case, what we will want, because we want this lip to be on, or this edge to be on this lip, and then it'll be sticking up a little bit in the back. But we're not quite there yet. We're getting pretty thin here, so I don't want to take any more away from down here. It's thicker here, it's thicker over here, so that's where I'm going to concentrate. And one of those sanding drums would probably do this faster, but I'm too lazy to change the bits right now. Okay, that looks pretty good. This side is leaning on that lip. There's a little bit of a gap in the back. Make sure everything's still I think this is still the lowest part here. Okay, now we can get ready to glue this in place. Now to glue this on here, gel super glue would be ideal, but I still don't have any, so I'm going to use regular super glue. And I'm going to try to run just a little bit all around this little lip. And in the back, maybe a little bit on this top edge, just to make sure. And I think that looks good. Hold it in place and hit it with a zip kicker. Okay, with that glued in place, I'm going to take, this is a, forget what size this is, but this is the size drill bit that will let the spray foam, the expanding foam tube go into it. And I'm just going to drill a hole here and one on the other side as well. Okay, now we can get the spray foam. So once again, this is the big gap filler spray foam, and I'm just going to drop it in there. And I've already shaken this for over a minute, so let's go ahead and spray it. Okay. And like I said before, don't try and clean that up now. It'll pop off real easy later. Right now it would be a sticky mess. And the reason I'm doing this is I want this to have some body inside there. I don't want this to be flexible. Right now it's just, thin plastic, flexible plastic in fact. So this will stiffen all that up quite a bit. And you want to drill 2 holes because if you only drill 1, there's a good chance you're going to blow apart the seams you just glued together because there's going to be some pressure as this expands. And hopefully this will fill that entire form. And this is going to take a little bit of time to totally cure, so it's reasonably late at night and we'll be back in the morning. Well, it's the next morning and we've got a bit of a mess here, but it does come off clean. Doesn't feel like anything came out the sides, which is really good. So the next thing we want to do is, I've got a couple pieces of Sintra here. This one is a 1/4 inch piece of Sintra, 1/4 inch thick, that I've cut out with a 2-inch hole saw, which is 51 millimeters. And when I say I've cut this out with a 2-inch hole saw, that does not mean that this is 2 inches across or 51 millimeters across. It's probably more like 1 7/8 of an inch because the hole saw is actually designed to make a hole, obviously. This is the piece that comes out of the hole, so it's smaller than the hole itself. So use a 2-inch hole saw will give you a 1 7/8 inch disc. This is a 1/8 inch piece of Sintra that I used a 1.5 inch hole saw, which is 38 millimeters, to cut out. And I'm going to glue these 2 pieces together. In fact, this is the piece of Sintra that I used a few minutes ago to show you how to line up the top piece of the funnel. And this is the same little piece of 1/4 inch rod. And I'm just going to use this once again to line everything up. Looks like this is kind of scratched up, so I'll use that. And this piece goes on top of that. Well, again, I'm pretty close. And then I'm just going to use this super glue. Try not to get it on the aluminum rod because you do want to pull these pieces off after you glue them up. And I want to wipe off any glue that squishes out. But now that that's glued together, let's see if we can't remove this rod. So despite me wanting to avoid gluing that on there, I did manage to glue this on there. So that's out. And now we're going to glue this as one piece onto the jetpack. Now the reason why I wanted to glue these 2 pieces together is because I want this combined width to be as thick as possible, because I want to, when I put this on here, I want it to take its position more by this rod than by laying on top of this. If you'll recall, there's a good chance that this is not 90 degrees to this. It's probably not quite level. So by making this thicker, it's going to be more likely to take its position 90 degrees to this rod. And I'm going to glue this on with some of the construction grade hot glue. I'm not sure I would use regular hot glue for this. I'm not sure that would be strong enough, but everything that I've been able to find, read, and see about this construction grade hot glue is that it's, after 24 hours, it's extremely difficult to pry the pieces apart, even with some leverage. So I think we're in pretty good shape using it to glue this piece on there. But by using hot glue, it's going to fill up any gap that's caused by this being, a little bit at an angle to this piece. And with all that, hopefully the result will be that the top of this will be, pretty close to 90 degrees to the rod. And probably should have mentioned it when you were drilling these holes here. You know, make sure they're not too far apart because you want to be able to cover them up with this 1.5 inch hole saw piece of Sintra. And I definitely want to remove any hot glue from that area because hot glue takes up a lot of space. Okay, that looks pretty good. And with any luck, it'll be pretty close to 90 degrees here. And that looks pretty good. I can go a little past it. Yep. Yep, I'm happy with that. We can go on to the next thing. Okay, so if you'll note, I forgot to do this part here, and you can add this piece on with the other two pieces before you glue the whole thing down. That'll make that even more stable. But this is just another 1/8 inch piece of Sintra that I've cut with a 1 1/4 inch hole saw or 32 millimeter hole saw. And you can actually put all three of those together and then glue all three of them down instead of the two that we did before. The next thing you're going to need to do is you need to find some of this mole and gopher bait poison pellets. Unfortunately, this is the only thing I can find that's this shape. And you'll have to find this, at least I had to find this online on Amazon. And this is the brand you want. I found one that was kind of like this at Home Depot or Lowe's, but it was a slightly different shape. So you need to try to find this one. And please be responsible with getting rid of the poison on the inside. You don't want to injure anybody's pets or anything. And then clean it out really well. And this is what we're going to need to put for the next piece that goes on this way. So obviously, first thing you have to do is take the label off. And it should look like this. So what you want to do is, if you look at this very end here, it's got straight sides and then it curves over and then it has straight side. So right where that change is, where it's straight and then it goes to be a curve, you want to draw a line right at that junction all the way around. And that'll give you something consistent to measure against. And then, like it says here, you want to measure down 1 3/4 inch, which is 4.4 millimeters. I'm sorry, centimeters. And you do that like 6 or 7 times, and then you can use that to draw a line, you know, just connect those dots. I did it, I tried to do it with 4 times and that wasn't enough, so I had to add some more dots and got that to work out pretty well. So I'm going to cut this out on this line and I'll be right back. Now that I have this piece cut off, I'm going to go ahead and glue on this piece, which is a 1/4 inch Sintra that's been cut out with a 1 inch hole saw. This actually should fit pretty snugly, which is nice. If it's a little bit too snug, you can kind of go in and shove it in with a dowel or something from the other end, you know, put it in this end and shove it in. There's quite a bit of flex to this material. If it's too small, well, then you can kind of do like we did in the last piece, where we kind of put hot glue all in this part and then centered it up when we set it down. But you might want to buy a couple of these just to make sure, that way if it's too big, you might want to just try again and cut it a little bit closer to the end. But you know, this fit fine with my measurements. And we'll do it the same way we have been. I'm using hot glue on this just because I did a test with super glue and I don't like the way it glues to this material. It's not real secure. I think I'll just put this in there just to make sure that it's laying flat. That probably wasn't necessary, but I'm going to give this about a minute to cool off, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, let's take a look. Looks pretty good. Might be like a 1,000th of an inch lower here than here, but we're really going by the rod that's going to be going through the middle of this to keep it upright, so I think we're in good shape. Now we can talk about what to do with the top half. And to do that, let's take a look at the old prototype. Okay, so here's my prototype. And first of all, I like the way this looks. I like the proportions. But at the same time, when I look at photographs of the actual prop and photographs of some of the early jetpacks that people made where they were actually able to take measurements from the prop, this top rocket piece here is much taller and much wider than this is. In fact, they're almost as wide as this is down here. It's a much closer relationship between this up here and that down there. And I know from some notes that I've taken that this piece, probably not on the original prop, but on those early prop or those early pieces that people made, you know, simulating the prop, this piece is PVC. Now this is a 1.5 inch PVC like this. That's the internal diameter. And if this is too small, I have to go the next size up, which is 2 inches. So more like this size, which will make this much closer to the width of this piece here. And because we'll have to use more of this piece of that yellow container in order to make it this size, it'll be taller. So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying that the one we're going to make now is going to be both taller and wider than this one. Okay, we're back with this piece here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take this knife and I'm going to cut this top out of it so that we can put that PVC pipe down into this. And you can do this however you want to. This is pretty easy to cut. So now I just want to see about how far this is. And I can actually see, you know, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but I can see the spot where this stops. And I'm just going to make this as straight up and down as I can. This doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm just going to mark, get it as close as you can. Try to get this as close to straight up and down as you can. And I actually want, if that's going to be where the PVC pipe touches, I want this to be a little bit bigger than that. So I'm going to say about 5 inches or maybe 12.7 centimeters. And the best thing about this is that if this ends up being too big, I'm going to kind of dry fit it first. If it looks like it's just way too big, then I can go ahead and cut this back down to the 1.5 inch PVC size, and we'll do like we did in the prototype. Like we did before, I'm just going to measure and mark 5 inches from the bottom all the way around about, 7 or 8 times. Okay, I actually ended up measuring about 12 times, but here's the line that I made by connecting those lines, or those dots. And now I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out. You can use, a box cutter or something. I'm gonna actually probably use the bandsaw just because I can get a little bit, I can put the fence up and, kind of use that to hold it in place. But I'll make that cut and I'll be right back. The next thing you wanna do is to take one of your pieces of 1/4 inch Sintra and use a 2 5/8 inch hole saw, which is 67 millimeters, and cut a piece of that out. And it should fit right into here. I think I cut mine just a tad bit short, so this is a little bit snug. It's pretty much right exactly the same as this. And I'm pretty sure I can just kind of work it into there, but I don't want it to be that bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sanding stick and I'm just going to put a bevel on this all the way around. This will take a little bit of time, but shouldn't be that bad. I'm afraid if you tried to do this on like a belt sander or something like that, you would end up taking way too much off. Unless you actually use the bevel attachment on a disc sander that's attached to your belt sander. That would probably be the ideal way to do that, in fact. But I'm just gonna do this and I'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, so it took me about 10 minutes just to sand this down to where it's got a little bit of a bevel on it. I did measure this with an angle finder, and it's between 8 and 9 degrees. If you wanted to use a sander and a little bevel table to do that. I was just afraid if I did that, I would cut in and have a big, it wouldn't be circular anymore. That fits in there pretty easily. And I'm going to go with hot glue again. I want a fair amount of it because this will make up for any irregularities I did with the sanding. Okay, and I'll let that cool and then we'll take a look at it. It'll probably be glued to the table at that point, but maybe I'll check it before that. That's not too bad. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look and see what this looks like on the jetpack itself. Okay, so let's just take this piece and thread it onto the rod. There we go. And I just want to see how that looks. I think that looks pretty much like the photos. But we do have a bit of a problem with this, and that is that my rod is not long enough to handle the rest of it. So let's go ahead and glue this down. And once again, let's wipe off any excess super glue. Okay. It seems to be well on there pretty well. And I'll bet you know what's coming next. We're gonna drill a couple of holes in here. Okay, and I've got that same 1/4 inch bit again. And this will be completely covered up, so you can pretty much do it anywhere. Okay, and this time I'm prepared. Got a kitchen-sized trash bag. And I've got a small piece of gaffer tape. That should make cleanup a little bit easier. And I'll wait a few hours for that to completely cure, and we'll be back. It's the next morning, and lo and behold, because I'm ready for a mess, I've got nothing. It's just, I have no idea why this did not expand all over the place, and everything else has before that, but it's just the universe messing with me. The only thing I can think of is it has been colder. It was colder last night than it has been, but I shouldn't complain. It's just a lot easier to clean up this way. Okay, so what we have here is a 1-inch thick section from a 2-inch PVC pipe. That's about 2.5 centimeters, length, I guess, for whatever PVC pipe that's metric, that's going to be in that 5 centimeter size area. And I'm pretty sure you know what's about to happen here. The only difference is I'm going to use super glue instead of, I'm going to use my CA glue instead of hot glue, and that'll become apparent later on. I'll tell you all about it. And once again, gel would be better, but I still don't have any. You want it to get as close to the edge as possible, and I'm pretty sure you can't see what I'm doing. I can barely see what I'm doing. Make sure everything's flat. Now I want to clean all of that zip kicker off that I can, because I'm about to put some more super glue at the top of this and I don't want it to immediately kick. And I want to be careful with this because I don't want to push it too far. But I do want to get it all the way in there before the super glue cures. It really seems to have stuck fast on me, probably because the zip kicker from before. Okay, here it is. What I basically did was laid it flat down on the ground, and I hit the edges with a hammer and drove everything flat. So it is completely flat now. I tried to pry it off first, which is why I've got some marks here. That'll be fine. This is going to go, well, both ends will be covered completely, so it's totally fine. And I may have broken some of the glue loose on this, but it'll be fine, trust me. Okay, we're gonna do things a little bit differently here. We're up toward the end here. If I were you on yours, I can't remember how long this rod was, but I would add about 1 inch to that length. If you've been following along at this point and you've already put this in place, that's totally fine too. I'm not gonna try to pull this off and replace it or anything. But what we want to do differently here is I want to take a file, and I don't want to weaken this very much, but I do want to use a file to carve some little indentions all the way around. I just want to make sure that this piece is on there very securely, because this is sort of the cap that's going to be holding everything on. I want to do more than scuff it up. I want to actually remove a little bit of material so that it's not cut in even half the distance of this piece, but that it is actually a little divot in here. It shouldn't be that difficult because it is aluminum, and so hopefully you can see. Maybe I can zoom in. So hopefully you can see that there is a little bit of a divot there, and I'm going to do the same thing on the back, but I don't want to do it, right along the same level as that piece. I'm going to go a little bit further down. Okay. It doesn't have to be the front, it can be anywhere. I just want to get some little divots so that there's really no reason to have to fill this structurally, but I want to fill it with, in this case, hot glue. Just so that it will really grab onto this really well and hold everything in position. So I have my hot glue gun heating up, and while it's heating up, I'm going to go ahead and drill the little holes here that I've done so many other times. The size really isn't that important. I'm just using the same bit that I have been using. And once the hot glue gun completely heats up, we'll go ahead and move on. Actually, while that's heating up, I can go ahead and put it in place. And once again, just using the CA glue. And let's go ahead and drop this into place. And that looks just about perfect. It's this bottom piece sticks just sort of the width of this yellow plastic past it. Part of me wishes I had filled this up with hot glue because it's still a little bit flexible because that foam is a little bit flexible. Whereas if I filled that with hot glue, it would be pretty solid, But that's a lot of hot glue. That's a pretty big volume. This is a pretty small volume. And even then, it's probably going to take me 3 full sticks of hot glue. That's my guess at this point. Let me go ahead and clean these up. So I'm not worried about this length because I still have enough of a rod there that I can use that as an alignment tool to put the very tip on here. So once the hot glue gun is hot, we'll keep going. Okay, I have my hot glue gun, and let's just see how much I can fit into here. This is also why I wasn't too worried about if some of the super glue had broken loose, because everything is going to be well glued together on this piece. And that hot glue is going to be sort of a mass of heat. So I may let that cool off before I put the next hot glue stick in there. Okay, it's been a few minutes and that should have cooled down, if not completely, then a little bit. And let's continue. I'm going to back up a little bit so you can actually see something. And so obviously the reason why I used the super glue is because I wanted it to be at least a different glue that I'm now filling this up with. Because it's surprising how much heat this is actually going to have once I fill this with hot glue. And super glue is also heat sensitive, but at least it's not the same temperature as, you know, the hot glue is. There we go. So it only took about 1.5 sticks. That's not too bad. Okay, so I've unplugged my hot glue gun. And it's important that we make sure this is nice and smooth because we have to put the very top cap on here. And we're not going to have that rod to use to, you know, make everything the right angle. So it's important that this bottom piece be perfectly flat. It's a lot easier to clean it off now when it's soft than once it hardens. Okay, and that should really hold this together and hold everything tight on here so that, you know, it makes everything a little bit stronger. And once that's cooled off, we'll start the next part. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we have to build that cone that's at the very top of the rocket tower. And the best way I've found to do that is to use particle board of some kind to stack pieces up and then shape that by sanding. And particle board is the best thing to use, at least the things that are readily available, simply because this is not a structural part, and particle board doesn't have any kind of grain, which is going to mess things up. It doesn't have any warping, which will make things a lot easier to stack and be nice and clean. It's kind of you know, unless you're getting into some very special materials, this is pretty much the best thing that we can use. This is MDF, which is medium density fiberboard. You don't have to use that. Use whatever kind of particle board you can get. And ideally, I'd say get a sheet of 1/2 inch, which is 12 millimeter MDF, and then cut 5 pieces out of that with a 2.5 inch hole saw. That's 6.4 centimeters. Now this is the only size of 1/2 inch that I had, so I actually had to get, I had to cut 2 pieces out of some 3/4 inch that I had. But it doesn't matter what thickness pieces you use, as long as a whole it all adds up to 2.5 inches or 6.4 centimeters. In my case, that's going to be 2 pieces of 3/4 inch and 2 pieces of 1/2 inch. It can also be 5 pieces of 1/2 inch. Now, if you'll notice here, I only have 1 piece of the 1/2 inch, and that's because I realized that I haven't shown any footage of me using a hole saw. So we're gonna go ahead and cut this piece out real quick using a hole saw. Okay, so fiberboard tends to be pretty caustic stuff when it comes to the sawdust. So I'm gonna go ahead and use my mask, and you need to do the same. Eye protection and breathing protection is always a good idea. So let me go ahead and put my mask on, and then we'll start. Try not to be so aggressive. Okay, so you'll notice I stop and I pull out because unlike a regular drill bit, a hole saw does not have a way to remove the sawdust. So you're gonna have to go down a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch, somewhere in there. And then you're gonna have to remove the sawdust. And then you can do it some more. Now I'm gonna continue to wear the mask, so I'm gonna use some compressed air to keep cleaning that out. Now I know that looks scary, but a lot of that was because I'm reaching way out over this to film it, and I'm on kind of a rickety thing here. It's really not that, I did all the other ones without any problem at all. Don't be afraid of using the hole saw, it's really not that bad. I may have torn this up a little too much. Let's see if I can glue this all back together real quick. I'm gonna try to glue it back together with some of this thin CA glue. So the real problem came in when I was getting toward the bottom of the cut, so it might be a good idea to cut halfway through it and then flip the thing over. You'll still have the hole that went through this central hole, and you can use that to line up and cut the rest of the way from the other direction. Like I said, I didn't have any problems at all when I was actually able to stand over this and not use this rickety platform. I made it look scary, but it's fine. Don't be afraid of it. Now that everything's cleaned up a little bit, let's go ahead and clean this up as well. It's got a pretty nasty edge here, so let's. Of course, if I make this the top of the piece, it really won't matter what this edge looks like. Now the reason why I used a 2.5 inch hole saw is because that is the closest thing to fitting on the top of that PVC pipe that we just put on the very top of the stack so far. This is actually a tiny bit smaller than it is, but I think it's still gonna work. Ideally, you'd want it to be a tiny bit larger than the PVC pipe, but my closest choice was like an 1/8 of an inch thicker, and it doesn't need to be anywhere near that much too big. So this is still going to work fine. And what we want to do is to glue these all together. And I'm going to take advantage of that same aluminum rod. Now, let's see. How do we want to do this? I'm going to make this the top because it's got the messed up outside, and there will be very little of this actually left to show. And I've got a 1/4 inch wooden dowel. This is important that you want to have some wooden dowel as well. You can actually do this whole thing with some wooden dowel, but I find that the aluminum is much more reliable as far as being straight. The wood tends to bow and not be straight, and you'll get a lot of wobble. I want to drive this about halfway into here. Let's go ahead and glue it first. I don't want to put this all the way through. I just want to put it about halfway into there. Go ahead and spray this with some zip kicker. I wanted to remove that from everything else because I don't want to get zip kicker everywhere so that the super glue cures instantly. That would be a bad thing. I want to have a little bit of working time on this. Okay, and now I can put this aluminum in there, and that'll keep everything lined up. Let's go ahead and put glue on here first. Make sure that you don't get glue too close to the center rod because we do not want to glue this in place. Yep. Okay, I want to make sure that this is loose. Now, something that I don't do very often, but I could, is put glue on this side. And then I'm going to take this and spray it with zip kicker. And I'm just going to wipe some of that glue away from that center hole. And now the zip kicker that's on this side should activate the super glue and cure that instantly. And I'm going to pry this out real quick so it doesn't completely glue itself into position. Okay, I just pulled that through that hole so that it wouldn't get glued in place. Oh, sorry about that. Let's put this back in a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to zip kicker this. Okay. Now the reason why we had to put the wooden dowel here at the top is because we don't want a hole in the top of the cone. So I needed wood up there, so when we finish carving this whole thing out, it'll be wood everywhere. So now I'm just going to take a little saw and cut this piece of wood off the end real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, so cut that off, and I smoothed that out a little bit. Pulled this out of the back, and just to stabilize this well, I'm going to go ahead and drip some of that thin super glue all over the top of this. This will soak into this porous wood and make it nice and strong. You don't have to do the whole top actually, because most of this is going to be gone. That should be plenty. I'll actually do this again. Once I carve this out, I'll cover the sides completely with this thin CA glue. I'm not going to hit this with zip kicker because I don't want it to expand and cure too fast, so I'll let it cure normally, and I'll be back in about a minute. Okay, so now let's flip this over and put this back in place. If you notice, I think I probably mentioned it before, but I've kind of sanded a little bevel in the end of this so that it's a little bit rounded. Makes it a lot easier to go in the hole than if you go the other way. And I want to make sure that's in good. You don't want to obviously try to drive the wooden piece out the other end, but I want to make sure it's nice and tight. Next, I'm going to chuck this into my drill and turn this to the highest speed on my drill. So basically what we want to do is to start this spinning, and then we want to sort of sand away everything and connect this back edge to pretty close to the dowel. You don't want to make this a sharp point. We're going to round it off at the end. So basically go from the edge of the dowel to the back edge of this. And you want to sort of do an imaginary line for that. And by spinning this and taking a rasp, you can actually do pretty quick work. And you can't really see. Can't see if you can see it on camera or not, but we're definitely moving some material. Obviously, the better way to do is to use a belt sander or your disc sander, which is what I'm going to do because it just makes it where I don't waste a whole lot of your time. we'll use both the drill and the sander. Okay, so I've moved over here to the combination belt sander and disc sander. And once again, I'm just going to try to sand an imaginary line from this corner here to basically not a sharp point in the middle, but up against where that dowel is. Now, when you're doing this, it's important to make the rotation of the drill go the opposite to the rotation of your disc. So the disc is going this way, so you want the drill to be going, you know, against it. If it was going this direction, then it essentially wouldn't be doing anything except for like a wheel on the ground. So by going this direction, we'll get, you know, a lot more sanding. So let's try it out. I don't want to go super fast on the drill. I want it to spin, but I don't want it to go super fast. So I'm trying to do as little damage to this as I can while I sand it. So no big chunks. You don't want super highly aggressive sandpaper here. I wouldn't go anything coarser than, say, 80 grit. So let's get started. Okay, we're getting pretty close on this part here, and we're getting there, but we still have a little bit more here to go. So I'm going to angle this a little bit more toward the point. Okay, that is just about what you want. I've got just a little bit of MDF around that center dowel. That's close enough. And that is pretty much right up against the edge. So we can round this off by hand. Okay, so let's take care of this little end piece. See if we can't round that over. And you notice it's still in the drill, because if we want it to be consistently rounded all the way around, we want this to be spinning. And I've just got a coarse sanding stick here, and see if we can't just smooth this over. It's hard for me to do this and see. And obviously you could do this over on the disc sander, but it'd be really easy to go too far and start making this shorter, and we don't want to do that. That's looking pretty good. Okay, now we have a nice rounded tip. Okay, now that we have this tip rounded off, I almost forgot to do this, so I'm glad I remembered. Is we're going to put some CA glue or super glue all over this. Basically, super glue can become a very good finish for wood. Now, I've never tried this with the thin CA glue, but we'll give it a shot. I'm running low in regular super glue, so we're going to try the thin stuff. Plus, I think this will penetrate better than the regular. So I just have paper towel here, and I'm going to pour some of the super glue on, and then turn this on. I'm going to run this very slowly. Okay, I don't want to spin it fast because I don't want this thing slinging super glue everywhere. But that will stabilize that fiber board as well as sealing it up nicely so that it won't just suck up all the paint when we try to paint it later. And just like before, I don't want to spray that with Zip Kicker because I don't want it to discolor and kind of, sometimes the super glue will kind of expand when you hit it with Zip Kicker. And I want this to be a nice finish, so I'm going to let that sit just for a minute or two, and we'll be back. Okay, one last thing before we put this on the top of the jetpack, and that is I've got some fine sandpaper, and I'm just going to smooth this off a little bit. The super glue is completely cured, but it's got a slightly rough finish, so I'm just going to hit it with some sandpaper. Now that's really smooth. The way to take this off is just to grab a hold of this nose cone part and then very slowly turn that, and it'll slide right off. Now for one last thing, I actually found some more super glue. If I can get that to focus. I want to get plenty of it on there. And then just using that center piece to line it up. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so we can now finally really look at this thing and how its proportions are. And I'm really happy. You can kind of see some of the differences in with the prototype here, especially in this rocket top part here. This is much closer to the proportions that are in the actual prop. But the overall dimensions of everything look really good. I've tried it on the armor and it fits really well there. So I'm really happy at this point. Now we're obviously not finished yet. We still have a lot of this detail stuff that needs to go on over here. As you can see, this one's a little bit taller because it has the bottom little domes. They go on the bottom of these tanks here. They're not on here yet, so this is a little bit shorter, but it'll all work out in the end. So overall, I'm really happy with the project, the way it's going right now. I really appreciate all the comments that I've been getting. Please keep it up. Even if it's just to say thanks for the video or hi, it doesn't matter. Any interaction that I'm getting with the videos helps enormously. So keep up the good work. And like always, if you appreciated the video, please like and subscribe and all that good stuff. It really is your comments that keep me motivated to make these videos. And even though we've got so much of this done now, we still have a lot of little details to go. And I look forward to working on it. So until next time, thanks.